Malik Carter was a 17-year-old black high school senior whose quiet confidence often masked the sharp mind beneath. Growing up in a modest neighborhood with a single mother, he spent evenings studying not just his school books, but thick, worn-out law volumes he borrowed from the local library, driven by a deep need to protect those around him from the injustices he saw too often. Judge Eleanor Whitfield was a seasoned, middle-aged white judge with a reputation for being hard on defendants, especially young men she perceived as arrogant or defiant, carrying herself with an air of authority that left no room for challenge in her courtroom. Attorney Davis, Malik's assigned public defender, was competent but cautious, the type to advise keeping one's head down rather than speaking out, afraid that boldness from a teenager would only make matters worse. Officer Briggs, the arresting officer, was broad-shouldered, quick-tempered, and convinced that unquestioned compliance was the only acceptable behavior, especially from someone Malik's age and background. Mrs. Carter, Malik's mother, was a determined and hard-working woman who had spent years juggling multiple jobs to ensure her son had opportunities she never did, her pride in him matched only by her fierce protectiveness. The morning air inside the small county courthouse felt heavy, as though the very walls soaked in the weight of decisions made there. The wood-paneled courtroom was silent, except for the faint squeak of the bailiff's shoes as he moved between rows. Malik Carter sat at a defense table, his posture upright, his dark eyes calm but alert beneath the brim of his slightly oversized suit jacket, a jacket borrowed from his uncle that hung loosely around his slender frame. He glanced briefly at his mother, sitting in the gallery behind him, her hands clasped so tightly they trembled. Judge Eleanor Whitfield, seated high on the bench, looked down at him with a mixture of skepticism and detachment, flipping to the thin folder that represented his entire case. The case itself on paper was simple. Obstruction of justice, after Malik questioned a police officer during the arrest of his friend. But for Malik, it was more than a case. It was a culmination of every unfair glance, every assumption, every moment someone looked at him and saw not potential, but trouble. "Mr. Carter," Judge Whitfield began, her voice carrying the sharp tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "This isn't a game, young man. You're just a kid. I'll handle the law here." Her words struck the air like a gavel, and a few murmurs rippled through the small audience. Malik didn't respond immediately. Instead, he breathed in slowly, keeping his gaze steady on hers. Inside, a fire burned, not of anger, but of preparation. She didn't know it yet, but the boy she had just dismissed was about to deliver something that would shake the quiet authority of that room and remind everyone present that knowledge didn't care about age. The events that had led Malik here began only a week earlier, on what should have been an ordinary Saturday. He and his best friend Jamal had walked into Thompson's corner store to grab sodas before heading to the park. They didn't know that minutes earlier, a man had slipped a candy bar into his pocket and walked out without paying. By the time Officer Briggs arrived, scanning the store, Jamal happened to be near the door holding his unopened drink. Malik watched as the officer's eyes narrowed, and without asking questions, Briggs accused Jamal of theft. Malik, knowing the store's security camera covered every inch of the entrance, calmly asked the officer to check the footage before making any accusations. "Stay in your place, son," Briggs snapped, dismissing him without even glancing at the cameras. When Malik persisted, not with shouting but with clear, pointed questions about evidence, the officer's irritation turned into something colder. Moments later, Malik was in handcuffs, the words "obstruction of justice" scribbled into the police report. Now in court, Briggs sat in a witness chair, speaking with practiced authority, describing Malik as aggressive and disruptive. Judge Whitfield nodded occasionally, her pen scratching notes, and Attorney Davis leaned toward Malik, whispering, "Let it go. Judges don't like it when young people try to act like lawyers." Malik said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Each word Briggs spoke, each twisted version of the truth, felt like another stone being stacked against him. The system was working exactly as it always had for people like him. Quick assumptions, little patience, and no expectation that he might actually understand his own rights. The air was thick with the unspoken message: stay quiet and accept your fate. When it was finally Malik's turn to speak, the courtroom seemed to collectively prepare for a teenager's nervous stumble through a few sentences. Instead, Malik rose slowly, his movements deliberate, and asked, "Your Honor, may I approach the bench?" Judge Whitfield's brows knit together, but she allowed it with a dismissive wave. Malik walked forward, his suit jacket swaying slightly, and placed a single sheet of handwritten notes on the bench. Then, without looking down, he began reciting, Terry v. Ohio, 392 U.S. 1, 1968. The Fourth Amendment protects individuals from unreasonable searches and seizures. His voice was steady, each word clipped and precise. Murmurs began in the gallery as he moved from one legal precedent to another, Miranda v. Arizona, Brown v. Board of Education, weaving them into a defense that connected directly to the actions Officer Briggs had taken. Malik pointed out the lack of probable cause, the officer's refusal to verify evidence, and a clear violation of his constitutional rights. Attorney Davis sat frozen, his eyes darting between Malik and the judge, while Briggs shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The court reporter's keys clicked frantically to keep up. Malik wasn't just repeating memorized phrases. He was explaining them, applying them, dismantling the prosecution's version of events piece by piece. Then came the revelation. Malik had been part of a community mentorship program for 2 years, learning courtroom procedures from a retired judge named Harold Kent, who believed knowledge of the law was the most powerful form of self-defense. With all due respect, Your Honor, Malik concluded, the law doesn't belong to age, title, or uniform. It belongs to every citizen willing to know it. By the time he stepped back, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Judge Whitfield's expression had shifted from faint amusement to something unreadable, a sign that the balance in the room had begun to change. Judge Whitfield called for a 15-minute recess, her gavel striking with an unusual hesitation. In the hallway, Mrs. Carter pulled Malik into a hug, so tight it seemed she feared letting go would make the moment vanish. Attorney Davis approached, still a little dazed, and admitted, I underestimated you, Malik. That was remarkable. When they returned, the judge's voice no longer carried the same condescending edge. She began asking Officer Briggs direct, pointed questions, revisiting details Malik had highlighted. His answers grew shorter, his confidence wavering. When she pressed about the decision to ignore the security footage, Briggs stumbled, admitting he didn't think it was necessary. Judge Whitfield's pen stopped moving, her gaze sharpening. Not necessary to check the truth? She asked, letting the words hang in the air. By the time the hearing concluded, she announced the charges against Malik were dismissed due to insufficient evidence and procedural violations, her voice firm. But before dismissing the court, she looked directly at Malik and said, Perhaps you're not just a kid after all, Mr. Carter. The faintest smile touched her lips before she turned away, leaving Malik with a quiet satisfaction of having shifted her perception, if only slightly. As the courtroom emptied, Malik lingered, taking the worn wooden benches, the seal above the judge's chair, the place where his voice had carried against all expectations. Outside, the sunlight hit his face, warm and steady, and his mother joined him, her hand slipping into his. I told you, she whispered, pride thick in her voice. Attorney Davis, now standing beside them, said with a grin, If you ever want an internship, I'll make a call. The law could use more minds like yours. Across the street, a small group of younger boys watched him, their eyes wide. They had seen him stand up to authority and win. Malik gave them a small nod, a silent message that they, too, could know their worth and their rights. As he walked away with his mother, he murmured, half to himself, half to her, If they won't stand up for us, we'll learn to stand up for ourselves. The words carried in the air behind him like a promise, leaving those who heard them with the same quiet hope that had fueled him all along.